Hi everybody, and thank you again for joining me on Gaffer and Gear. Today we're going to take a look at the Luna Bulb from Astera. Now the advantage this has over our other bulbs on set is this actually looks like an old school bulb. Now it also has the advantage, let's say you want to use this in a chandelier or in a practical light that has a small lampshade, you can also remove the exterior bulb to reveal a slimmer profile bulb underneath. Now the advantage this thing has is it's got built-in CRMX control, and it also has the Titan light engine. So we've got a huge CCT range, and we've also got full color gamut lighting. Also in this episode, we're going to take a look at the PrepCase. We're going to take a look at the accessory kit that's available as an optional extra. And we're going to take a look at your set design options that will be available soon. There's a range of product coming out called the Exo Luna. Before we get into the review, here's some pricing that I found online. A bulb by itself seems to be selling for about 93 US dollars and about 230 Australian dollars. A PrepCase complete with 8 bulbs seems to be selling for about 1,080 US dollars. But I couldn't find an Australian dollar price for a complete kit. And I think this is because in Australia, you've got a choice of bayonet or Edison connection. But an empty PrepCase in either format sells for about $975. Okay, let's start off with the regular disclaimers. I'm not getting paid any money for this review, and I don't have any financial agreements in place. However, all of the product was sent to me for free, and I do get to keep it or sell it at the end of the episode, which is technically a paid endorsement, which is why the warning comes up at the start. Okay, let's go through the pros and cons first, starting off with the cons to get those out of the way. Now, one of the reasons this looks like a genuine old school light bulb is because it doesn't have any buttons, and this could potentially be your first con, or at the very least, it's something you really need to be aware of before you buy any of these, all right? So let's imagine that you're a small-time operator. You just want to buy a couple of these. You don't want to buy the kit here with the controls in it, all right? So we've got our bulb for the first time. We're plugging it into our power. Okay, so that's got AC going to it. How do you turn it on? It doesn't have an on switch. It doesn't have any brightness controls or CCT controls, all right? So you're probably thinking, well, duh, I'm going to run it off the phone app. Okay, so let's imagine you've got a phone app, you've got the Art 7, you've got all that stuff because you already own some Titan or Helios tubes. Now, when you link one of these tubes to the app for the first time, you hold down the power button and you put it into blue mode. Okay, so that's how it links to the phone app. That's a Bluetooth reset. All right, so let's try the same thing on our bulb. Well, there's no power button. So you can't blue mode this if you've just got only the bulb. Now, maybe you're thinking you're going to run it off CRMX. Well, you can't get into the menu system. So you can't link and unlink your transmitter. You can't set a DMX address. You can't even select a profile. So if you buy the bulb by itself and you have nothing else, this is completely useless. So if you want to have one of these and have it working, the minimum purchase is the bulb plus the white remote control. Okay, now if you've got the remote control, you can dim this up, you can change your CCT. Now with the white control, you can't get into color modes and you can't do effects. Okay, if you want to do some effects or colors, you're going to need the black remote control, which does your effects. So for example, I press the fire button, we get the fire effect. What have we got here? Disco, we've got the disco effect. I can select some colors and things like that. Black control is your effects control. The white remote control is your white light mode or your CCT mode. Now, the reason I'd suggest you get the white remote control apart from having CCT control is you can blue mode it from here. Okay, so you can set this up to work on the phone app with this white remote control. This is an essential thing to have if you don't have the Prep kit. Now, here's where you can get tripped up if you just have the remote control and don't have the PrepCase, all right? So let's imagine that you've rented this out to me and I've set it up to run off CRMX, wireless DMX control. And I've told it to only respond to commands from CRMX. I've turned off the automatic mode, okay? So I give it back to you, you've got your remote control, and your remote control no longer works. Okay, so that is something to be aware of. That is a gotcha that could realistically happen. Now, regardless of the mode that the bulb is set to, the white remote control will always be able to blue mode it. Now, the next possible negative for people is there's no internal battery. Let's have a look at how small this thing is. I mean, there's nowhere to put a battery inside it, but as a workaround, you could use this Tether Tools adapter. So I've got this light here running off a V-mount battery via this Tether Tools inverter. So I've already got an episode on this, so go have a look at that as a possible solution. Now, the last possible negative, this is only a 3.5 watt LED light engine, and it's going through 2 diffusions in order to get the full bulb illuminated. So it's not very bright. All right, let's get into the pros. And I think the biggest overwhelming pro for this is the shape. I mean, it looks like an old school light bulb, and not just because it's a fully illuminated orb, not just the top hemisphere, but it's the correct size. A lot of our smart bulbs are physically bigger than our traditional bulbs were, which is a little bit why they look out of place when you put them inside a lampshade. Now, I think the next big pro for this is the removable shell, and not just because it gives you 2 choices of the shape of the bulb, it opens up a whole world of accessories that you can put onto the front. So you get more accessory choices with this than you do any other smart bulb. But not just the Astera accessories, third-party companies are now making accessories for these too. And the third-party accessories are getting a lot of support from Astera. The more people that make product for this, the more people are going to want to buy the Luna Bulb, so everybody benefits. Because you can remove the shell, you can 3D print your own shells. So a lot of productions, like stage productions, a lot of event companies are 3D printing their own shapes for their productions. Other pros, it's IP44 rated, so you can use it outside in the rain, assuming that your connections are weather resistant. It has built-in CRMX and Bluetooth operation, but my biggest pro for these is if you're using a PrepCase light in shot, chances are you want it really amber or in low CCTs. And the Titan light engine has superb color render down at these low CCTs. Let's take a closer look at the bulb now, and compared to a NYX bulb, you can see there's a definite size decrease, which is why these look more realistic in a small lampshade. All right, let's open it up and have a look at how it's working on the inside. Now, that looks like it's fairly evenly illuminated because we're exposing for the environment around the bulb. But if we expose down, you can see there's definitely 2 Titan pixel light engines in there, which is separated. Now, that's never going to be obvious on camera because once you expose up, you can't see that. Now, this diffused area here helps to evenly illuminate the light out, which is why it can illuminate the orb. Now, in terms of brightness, I was very intrigued as to how much light we actually lose this mode compared to this mode. And how do we measure it? Do we measure it from the front or do we measure it from the side? And I also wanted to have a look at how it goes brightness-wise compared to the NYX bulb, particularly side on. I mean, this has only got half a hemisphere and this has got a fully illuminated surface. Does that affect the brightness? So taking brightness readings with the Luna Bulb front on, it is 20% brighter with the bulb cover on. However, taking brightness readings from the side, the Luna Bulb is 25% brighter without the bulb cover on. Now, comparing it to the NYX bulb, with a reading taken from the front, the NYX bulb is about 4.6 times brighter. From side on, the NYX bulb is still brighter, but only 2.8 times. Okay, let's take a look at the Luna Bulb Accessory Kit. And the first thing I like about this kit is it has an instruction manual on the lid, which is very easy to follow. Even if you can't read, you can follow along with this. It's like Lego instructions. So in this section, we're going to take a look at what we get, and we're also going to have a look at some of the combinations and compare them to the brightness of a NYX bulb, because some of these results could be quite interesting. All right, so let's start going through. So the first thing we get is these little reflectors. Now, these do an amazing job of intensifying the light. So have a look at this. Quite a bit of difference there. So that'll be interesting on a brightness comparison. We get 4 of these snoots. we get 4 of these, what I'm going to call helmets. We get 4 lenses. And we get 4 of the domes. All right, so let's start off by having a look at what I think is the most interesting thing in the kit. So let's say you're an owner-operator like me, you've got a kit of 8 NIX bulbs, and you've got a kit of 8 Luna bulbs, and you've got a setup that needs 16 matching looks. Okay, so you can make this look like a NIX bulb. So just take off your cover, put the reflector on, which increases the intensity out, and then put a dome on top. Okay, and that matches the look of a NIX bulb. So here's a brightness comparison of that setup versus a NIX bulb, and as you can see, it's not going to replace our NIX bulbs in terms of brightness anytime soon. The next combination we'll look at is the reflector to intensify the light output with the dome, plus you can put a snoot. All right, next thing to look at is the reflector. Now, if you don't want it spreading everywhere, you can put the snoot onto the front. And there you go. This is without the snoot, and this is with the snoot on. So here's the brightness comparison of that setup to the NIX bulb. And as you can see, the NIX bulb is still brighter. The next combination we'll look at is the reflector to intensify the light and the lens over the front. So this gives you quite a small profile fixture. And you can of course use that with the snoot. This is without the snoot, and this is with the snoot on. So here's the brightness comparison of that setup to the NIX bulb. And as you can see, the NIX bulb is still brighter. Now let's take a look at what I call the helmet, or they call the Luna shade. All right, so this just clips on, and then you can adjust the top to suit. All right, so what is this for? Well, maybe you need one side facing towards the camera to be brighter than the side facing towards the actor, or vice versa. Or you've got a lampshade and you don't want the front of the lampshade too bright, but you need brightness out of the back. That's where this can come in handy. Now let's take a look at some third-party accessories that will be available soon. So this is the Exo Luna range. Okay, so if you Google this, it will come up on your search engine. So they've got a range of boutique attachments that will work with the Luna bulb. Now they are not available yet, and they couldn't send me any finished product, but they will be available in a couple of weeks. So what they have sent me is some of their early version prototypes that are 3D printed. So the finished product won't look like this. It'll be way better quality. And it just clips onto the Luna bulb like that. So you've got classy looking fixtures that are more suited to your art department, for example, or to your set design. This one's a rose, for example. Just got to get that on. Okay, so you can't really see that. Let's dim that down a little bit. So you get the idea of the sort of product that they're going to be able to make. So again, these are slightly yellow because they're a 3D printed early generation prototype. The finished product will be a optical resin soft touch silicone based material, and the mount will be aluminium. So this is made by a company called Lock Circle, so you can check them out at www.lockcircle.com, and you can also hit them up on Instagram. Okay, so let's talk about the PrepCase. Now, the PrepCase has an internal battery, and that internal battery can power all of the bulbs at the same time for about 1 hour at full power. Now, that's something that you don't actually want to do, okay? The PrepCase is just for setting up the bulbs. If you leave a bulb in there for an hour, it will start to overheat. Now, there's no risk involved in that. It'll just eventually shut down, but you do have enough setup time that you could have all the bulbs being set up for 1 hour over a day, and it would still run. Now, let's say, for example, you don't have access to AC power at your location, and you're going to need more time than that. Well, this thing powers off 24 volts. So you could get one of their runtime extenders and slap a V-mount battery on that and power the system off a V-mount battery. Now, if you've got access to your AC power, you can run it off the power supply that is supplied with the unit. Now I'm going to give you a bit of a fun fact that's a little bit unknown about the PrepCase. All right, so let's select all, and let's turn all the bulbs on to full brightness. All right, so these are running, getting powered off the PrepCase. Okay, so if we take the bulbs out, we have open Edison terminals in there. Now, if I stick my fingers into those terminals, I don't get electrocuted. Why not? Because the terminals only have 48 volts running through to them. Okay, so that is a safety feature. So you can't stick your fingers into this thing and get electrocuted. But here's the thing to think about. These are running at full power off 48 volts. So that means that these can run off AC power and universal AC power. It doesn't matter what country you're in, but they can also run off 48 volts. So that's probably something that you would never do, but it is something that might be handy to know. Let's say you're working in an environment where AC power is dangerous, or maybe you've got a stunt person getting hit over the head with a light. I'm sure that stunt person would prefer that the light is powered off 48 volts DC instead of, say, 240 volts AC. Now let's have a quick look at the user interface. It is almost identical to the rest of your Astera products, so that makes it very fast to learn. It does have a few additional buttons though. So it's got a select all button, which will select every single bulb in the kit, assuming that you've got a bulb in slot 1, and it's also got a blue mode button, because remember, there's no power button on these to press down to get into blue mode. So if you wanted to have all of these bulbs running off the phone app and you just rented the kit, all you need to do is turn it on, press select all and press blue mode, and you're ready to link to the phone app. Now, another thing to note with the PrepCase is you don't have to buy the whole case. You can just buy the inlay as a separate item. Now, another thing to note with the PrepCase is it has a Bluetooth bridge. On the display is the Bluetooth pin should you need to link to it. So you can use the Bluetooth bridge to talk to the bulbs. And that comes in really handy when you're doing a firmware update. The PrepCase communicates to the bulbs via infrared. So there are infrared transmitters in all of the slots. Each slot has a light indicating its status. A solid blue light means there's a bulb in place and it's communicating to the case. If you put a new bulb into a slot, the indicator light will flash blue, meaning it's detected that there's a bulb in play, but it's not communicating yet. When that color goes solid, it means it's communicating to the box. A green indicator light means that that bulb has been selected to have its parameters changed. Okay, so let's start off with something relatively simple. Let's select all of the bulbs and put them onto the same setting. The controls are pretty much the same as you have on any Astera light product. Now let's say we want to adjust bulb 7, but not the other bulbs. Just deselect everything, select bulb 7, and now I can make my adjustments. Now just to note, the settings are saved into the bulbs. They're not saved into the slots. So if I swap these two around, the colors will also swap. Now if I want to select multiple bulbs but not select all, I have to make sure that bulb 1 is selected first. Then I can select the other bulbs that I want to change. Now let's say I want to put all of my bulbs onto CRMX. I press select all, making sure all of the green lights are illuminated, and then go through my menu until I find unlink CRMX and hit enter. Now everything is unlinked and I'm ready to hit link on my transmitter. The CRMX status will change on the screen, and you will see the bulbs change over to the CRMX command they're receiving. Now let's have a look at our DMX address options. We've got incremental DMX address and same DMX address. Now at the moment, they're all set to the same DMX address, which is address 14. So if I change that, you can see it affects all of the bulbs. Now let's have a look at incremental DMX address. So let's select that. Now, if I want to have these on incremental DMX addresses, assuming that they're all on the same profile, I just need to set the DMX start address for bulb 1, and then all of the rest will follow. But in order to do this, I need to change the number first. That is a little safety feature that's built in, just to make sure that if you're scrolling through the menu accidentally, you don't change every single DMX address. So as you can see, every single bulb is receiving a different DMX command now. Now, if I want them all receiving the same command, I just go back into the menu system, Select same DMX address number. I have to change the number first, just to get around the safety, and now they're all operating on the same DMX address. Very fast to set up. Let's take a look now at how responsive the CRMX is. And just a reminder that if this section doesn't interest you, the episode is chaptered and indexed, so you can skip to the next section. This is the Luna Bulb. And to give you a few things to compare to, I also have a NIX bulb. I have the NIX bulb facing downwards to help me get an exposure match. And I also have a Helios tube in the mix as well. Now all three lights are on the same DMX profile. They're all receiving their DMX commands via their internal CRMX receivers, and they're all on the same standard dimmer curve and receiving their commands at the same time. Now just to note, because I'm a tight ass and I film Gaffer in gear on a mobile phone, there is a little bit of flickering here because the phone is using a high-speed shutter to adjust the exposure instead of an iris. Let's start off the testing with instant on-off commands. Now let's take a look at some half-second cues. And now for some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. And now for some 5-second cues. And now for some changeovers between 5600 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin, starting with instant changeovers. Now for some half-second changeovers. Now some 1-second changeovers. Now for some 2.5-second changeovers. And now for some 5-second changeovers. And now for some changeovers between a CCT and a color hue, starting with instant changeovers. Now for some half-second changeovers. Now for some 1-second changeovers. Now for some 2.5 second changeovers. And now for some 5 second changeovers. Now I just want to point out that I have double checked the settings on the lights, and they all definitely have the same dimmer curve selected. Let's start going through the data I've collected, starting off with the AC power draw. At 3200 Kelvin I recorded 4.2 watt, and at 5600 Kelvin I recorded 4.6 watt. Now it does have a very low power factor unity score of 0.41. Now I think this low power factor unity score would only be a problem if you were going to run, say, 100 of these on a festoon and try to power it off, say, a 1 kVA generator or a 600 watt inverter battery system. Other than that, I don't think you'd ever have a problem. Now let's take a look at the dimming characteristics. Starting with 3200 Kelvin. I've taken readings at 100%, 75%, 50%, 25% and 10%. I haven't taken readings below 10% because the light is so dull that I can't get accurate readings. The CCT is very accurate. The color render score is a constant 94 down to 10% where it actually goes up a little. But have a look at the white point placement or delta UV. This light stays rock solid on its white point as you dim. Now let's take a look at 5600 Kelvin. It's a very consistent CCT until you get down to about 25%. The TN30 color render scores are a constant 91, and the white point does have a little bit of variation in it. The total amount of variation is about roughly the equivalent of 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel, so I wouldn't be too concerned about it. Now let's take a look at the CCT accuracies. I've taken CCT readings at every Kelvin between 1750 and 6000 Kelvin to give you these results. And these are the averages. Now let's take a look at the TN30 color render scores. And again, I took readings at every Kelvin between 1750 to 6500 Kelvin. The highest score is a 96 and the lowest score is a 90, but it doesn't drop down to 90 until you get to 5900 Kelvin. Now let's take a look at the white point, also known as our green magenta shift, measured in delta UV. From 1750 Kelvin to 5000 Kelvin, it tracks extremely accurately to the Planckian curve, with no perceivable green or magenta shift. Between 5000 Kelvin and 6000 Kelvin, it does break away from the Planckian curve and position itself halfway between the Planckian curve and the daylight curve, with an average delta UV of plus 0.0010. Now let's take a closer look at some of the CCTs, starting off with the lowest CCT that we can dial in. When I dialed in the lowest CCT of 1750, I got 1765. The TN30 color testing results were 95% color accuracy with an average 98% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R8, R9 and R12 were below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is almost perfect with a delta UV of minus 0.0002. When I dialed in 2500 Kelvin, I got 2509. The TN30 color testing results were 96% average color accuracy with an average 101% color saturation. All of the CRI scores are plus 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0003. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3201 with an SSI score of 84. The TN30 color testing results were 94% average color accuracy with an average 101% color saturation. With the CRI scores, only R12 was below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0005. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4429. The TN30 color testing results were 92% average color accuracy with an average 100% color saturation. With the CRI scores, only R12 was below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of plus 0.0003. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5559 with an SSI score of 71. The TM30 colour testing results were 91% average colour accuracy with an average 99% colour saturation, with the CRI scores R9 and R12 were below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0016, which splits it right between the Planckian and daylight curve. So if you work into the Planckian curve, it'll be slightly green to the equivalent of about 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel. And if you work into the daylight curve, it'll be slightly magenta to the equivalent of about 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 10,000 Kelvin, I got 10,274. The TM30 colour testing results were 86% average colour accuracy with an average 98% colour saturation. But have a look at the graph here, because this is where averages can be a little bit misleading. With the CRI scores, R8, R9, R12 and R15 were all below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0023. When I dialed in the top CCT of 20,000, I got 19,489. The TM30 colour testing results were 84% average colour accuracy with an average 95% colour saturation, with the CRI scores R4, R5, R9, R12 and R15 are all below 90. This is a spectrum distribution, and the light is slightly green to a little bit more than the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel with a delta UV of plus 0.0043. Now let's have a look at how accurately the Luna Bulb dials in its colour vectors. Red, which should be 0 or 360 degrees, came in at 2 degrees. Green was smack on at 120 degrees. Blue was smack on at 240 degrees. Yellow, which should be 60 degrees, came in at 49 degrees, but it does actually look yellow. Cyan, which should be 180 degrees, came in very close at 181. And magenta, which should be 300 degrees, came in at 286. Alright, so just my closing thoughts. This is not going to replace other bulbs like the Aperture B7C, for example, because that thing's got an internal battery and it's got manual control. It's designed for a different purpose than this. It's not going to replace our NYX bulbs either, because they are brighter, but if you need something in shot that looks like an old school bulb, that's where these are going to hero. And the reason I think these are going to be so successful as a product for them, if they're not hugely successful already, is if you think about the scenarios where you might need this. Let's say you're shooting at a restaurant and every table in the restaurant has some little decorative light on the table in shot. Or let's say, for example, you want to fill out a chandelier with the little bulb attachment here. Well, which either one of those scenarios you're in, 8 bulbs is not going to be enough. I think the people that are really going to want these in their set design, the people that are going to want dozens of these things, if not hundreds of them. And that is why this is going to be a hugely successful product.